Welcome to the Constitution Show, brought to you by the American Constitutional Rights Union. I'm your host, Tom McHale, here with co-host and producer, Joe Armacost. Hey,
Hey,
Joe.
it is so good to be back, and my voice is all ready for you too. I took a
Good.
puberty pill before we started. Okay.
Nice. Hey, this is the time to be discussing constitutional concepts, isn't it?
Yes, it
Yeah.
is, and I'm glad to be here, Tom. You're looking sharp today, buddy.
Literally buttons and all. So
All right.
literally everything in the news is some sort of argument over what's constitutional and what's not.
You ready to go?
Now, yeah, and we're talking about
All right.
recesses and all this. So we're going to actually continue our journey through the Constitution. Last show, we did a quick walkthrough of the 7 articles of the Constitution, and now we're going to drill down into each one. Not all today. We'll do Article 1 today, and then we'll proceed with future shows to get through the rest of it. Ready? Let's go. Okay.
All right.
Article 1. The most important part of the Constitution, at least as defined by the founders, the legislative branch. If you'll remember from last time, the whole Constitution is only about 4,380 words, give or take a few, depending on how you count. But Article 1, the first of 7, is over half of that. And that's kind of a reflection of the importance the founders placed on the legislative branch. This is where all, or I should say, the vast majority of the power of the federal government should be. Not the power of everything, as we'll get to in a few minutes, but the power of the federal government. Big difference. So let's dig in. It consists of 10 different sections, and we're going to do a quick walkthrough of each. The first one is the most important, the lawmaking body. Kind of defines what that is. All right. Don't worry. I'm going to read the entire section 1 of the beginning of the Constitution. You ready? All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. That's it.
That's it.
These guys were short and to the point, weren't they?
Well, things were different back then with politicians, weren't they?
If we wrote this now, I think it would be a set of encyclopedias just
think so.
discussing the importance of those jobs, right? But that's it. And it's interesting because the thinking behind this was that we've got 2 legislative bodies by design. Also by design, they're supposed to be very different from each other, even contentious. And if you look at the Federalist Papers, some writings by James Madison, otherwise known as Publius, in the Federalist Papers. I think it was Federalist 51. He talked about the importance of in a Republican government having different bodies with slightly different loyalties and origins and experience levels. And the idea was you want a little bit of friction, you want some challenge, you want some different perspectives under the theory that the end result would be better with more debate and more rigor to the process. So a little side journey there, but it's an important underlying point for everything else. So Section 2 goes into the House of Representatives, Congress, the 435 folks that fight for microphone time and in front of the Capitol daily. These folks were intended to be close to the public, right? The idea was that this is the direct voice of the people. So they've got 2-year terms. That's why they're constantly running for re-election, which that's a whole separate topic, whether representatives should even worry about being reelected. But we'll cover that in a different show, right? They're elected directly by the people. They can be fairly young. 25 years old is the minimum legal age to do that. Don't have to be born in the country. They just have to have been a citizen for 7 years. And we see quite a few examples of people who have immigrated to this country, become citizens, and are now in Congress and helping to make laws.
I forgot
Go
how
ahead.
young it was that you could be in the House.
You know what? I
25
know.
years
And
old.
I don't remember. I don't know who's the youngest, but I know at the time, I think AOC was fairly young, right? Was she in
Yeah,
her 20s somewhere, late 20s?
I thought she
I'm not
was. Yeah.
sure. Well, okay, we'll need somebody to answer that in the comments, just as a trivia question. But an interesting sidebar here is this is where our census came from, because not only was the concept of the House of Representatives to be close to the people and represent their will on a very short-term basis, this is where Congress gets different weights of representation by state based on the population. Okay, so part of Section 2 says, hey, we're going to have a census every 10 years, and based on the population, of each state were going to choose the number of representatives, not more than one for every 30,000. Now, if you're math inclined, you'll figure out we had to change that pretty quickly, because if we had one representative for every 30,000 citizens, we would have almost 11,000 congressmen in
My
that
goodness,
side.
man, come to your senses.
So thankfully, somebody came up with the Apportionment Act of 1911 and said, "Hey, we got to cap the number. We'll do it proportionately." so hence we've always got 435, and the number from each state vary based on the population as determined by the census. So another thing that's defined in Section 2 is the power of impeachment, and I like to think of this as district attorney power. They can't try, they can't kick anybody out of office, but they can bring charges of impeachment. And we've seen that a number of times. Trump was impeached, Clinton was impeached. So there's, I think we're at 4 now. I'll have to double check that people have been impeached. But so that's another Congress. Now, Section 3 is where we get into the opposing body, and this is very different design. This is more long term. You might say more mature. 6-year term. So the idea was these folks stick around longer, want them to be a little older, 30 years minimum age. Again, 9 years as a citizen. You don't have to be born here to be in the Senate. You have to be a resident of the state that you're representing in the Senate. Now, here is a reflection of state power in the design of the Senate body. Each state has 2 senators. So, and that's kind of a nod to say each of the 50 states has an equal vote on Senate issues rather than a population-based vote. And this is what gives the lesser populated states some protection as the population minority, so to speak. Now, it's interesting sidebar. Back in original times, it was the legislator it was their responsibility to pick senators from each state, right? Now we've actually gone to a direct vote for senators, but that's how it originally was. So a couple of other things about the Senate: they follow through on the impeachment process. So where the House is kind of like the DA bringing charges, the Senate is the judicial process. They're the ones who would actually hold an impeachment trial and create penalties.
With a 6-year term, that really gives them a lot of power. Also, the fact there's only 2 per state. That gives them a lot of power. It's a very, very powerful position. And
it is.
I've heard people don't understand why I say that. Could you explain, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, just look at the simple numbers. So each state has basically a 1/50th say in all of those issues, again, regardless of population. So in theory, at least, a vote from the 2 senators of Rhode Island is every bit as powerful as a vote from the 2 senators of California.
Yes.
And vastly different population numbers. Yeah. So one more thing interesting to know about the Senate is the cycle of thirds. With the creation of the very first Senate, a third of the body had a 2-year term, a third had a 4-year term, and a third had a 6-year term. And what that created was this concept of turnover with every major election. We're only turning over a third of the Senate. So the idea was that there's some stability over time, unlike the House, which turns over every 2 years. So, hey, let's move on. Section 4, logistics. This cracks me up because originally I don't even know if I can say this with a straight face. Congress was supposed to be a part-time job. It was expected that senators and representatives would hold down careers and occupations, and once a year they'd kind of cruise in and meet and take care of business and then go back to work. Right? In fact, the only thing stipulated originally was that they have to meet for at least, ready, 1 day. And that happened to be the first Monday of December every year. Later, that got changed to January, but yeah. So anyway, so also under Section 4, it was defined that states would have control over how elections worked within their state. That kind of got standardized somewhat with the 17th Amendment going forward. Rules. You'd think there weren't any rules, wouldn't you, of how Congress is supposed to work?
Why?
Exactly. So the idea is majority rules. Technically, there has to be a quorum, meaning half plus one to do business, but they make their own rules. So they've kind of developed a lot of business gets done with less than a quorum. That's not as bad as it sounds because any representative or senator can say, hey, I object to doing business because we don't have a quorum. So if it's something important and there's 10 people in the room, somebody can stand up and say, hey, I demand a quorum for this. It's an important issue to me, at least. Let's go. That is fine. It's one of the realities of doing business with all those folks. So, however, it's often used as a delaying tactic. The Constitution does give Congress the ability to make its own rules for behavior and decor in the chambers and in the process, and they can kick somebody out with a 2/3 majority.
A lot of
Now,
this is making me laugh so far, Tom.
oh wait, it gets better.
Oh, it gets better, doesn't it?
It does. Well, our politicians are kind of masters at bending the rules and making things work to their advantage, right?
Yes.
So, we're about to come up on an example of exactly that. So,
Okay.
the two bodies have to play nice, meaning, if they can't agree on something, one can't be in session while the other's out of session. They generally have to be in session at the same time. They can take breaks, but only up to 3 days can they be in or out of session in opposition to the other side. Okay. There is a nifty little trick, kind of back to the point you just raised, that they've developed to kind of skirt the system a little bit. They can be in what's called a pro forma session, which is pro forma session, which means, yeah, we're in session. It's all good. We're following the rules and doing all these things. But a pro forma session is kind of like Walmart saying we are open 24 hours a day. It's just that we lock the front door from midnight to 8 a.m., but we are open. So that's kind of what a pro forma session is. Little bit of bending the rules. Yeah, this is fun. Guess who gets to determine their own pay?
You mean?
You get 3 guesses because I know it's a tough one. I mean, back in, I think it was 1970, we had a little issue with the postal workers up in New York and some other places going on strike because they were kind of cranky that they got a 4% raise while our representatives in Washington voted themselves a 40-something percent range.
Why not?
So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, hey, they're worth it, right? So here's an interesting one. Also in Section 6, there's this concept of privilege. And it's not quite as scary as it sounds, but what it boils down to is they have some reasonable, limited, understandable immunity from frivolous prosecution. And the idea, they can't get away with murder or treason or serious crimes like that, but law enforcement's generally supposed to leave them alone when they're either engaged in doing the business of the country or traveling to and from. Realistically, it's all the time. So the reason for that is to prevent the executive branch, which oversees law enforcement, from harassing political opponents in the House and Senate. So, yeah, has it been abused? Yeah, I'm sure. Last thing in Section 6 is the concept of you've got to commit to what branch of government you're. Oh my gosh, I almost said serve in. These people don't serve. Let's get that straight. They get a heck of a lot of benefits for the work they do, but you can't be in the legislative branch and say, hey, we're going to create a position of the Department of Nintendo playing, and I'm going to hire myself at that job for $10 million a year, right? You have to, if you're in the legislative branch, you got to stay there until your term is up before you move to some other job in the executive or judicial branches. So trying to keep things clean, keep the loyalties within the respective branches.
Now that's something I didn't know, by the way.
All right, we're going to have to ask children to leave here because this is about bill creation. So the basic idea is when the Senate and the House love each other very much, okay, we won't go there. But the Article 1 does define how laws are to be made. And the short version is this: the House and Senate have to agree on legislation before it goes off to the president for signature. A couple of little interesting sidebars. In the Constitution text itself, it talks about the House having primary responsibility for raising money. Over time, they've kind of taken that to say, hey, anything involving raising money, spending money, financial stuff, that's our domain, right? So they're supposed to originate, at least in their own minds, they're supposed to originate those types of bills in the House. Those aren't supposed to originate in the Senate. And there have been examples over history where the Senate has tried to originate stuff like that, and the House just rejects it and sends it right back to them and says, nope, that's our domain. We started. Now, the Senate gets to participate in that process, and they get to, weigh in, make changes, oppose, whatever, but it's supposed to start in the House. So any bill, regardless of content, has to go back and forth between both until they agree on the terms and language and meaning and all that. And then it goes off to the president, who has 10 days to sign it into law. So
I'm just a bill here on Capitol
That's
Hill.
right. That's right.
Someone had to do that. And I knew it wouldn't be you, Tom.
It had to be you. But it's funny, not just senators and congressmen have come up with nifty little get around tricks. Presidents have too, because there's a 10-day period that they have to sign a bill. Now, if they don't sign it in 10 days, it automatically becomes law. So this is a nice little trick that a president can use if they oppose something, but they either can't win a veto or they're not willing to go to that extreme to veto. Then it can become law, and they can stand back and say, I never signed that legislation when they run for re-election, right? So a nifty little trick. And they can also do something like a pocket veto, where they can kill a bill if the timing works out just right and Congress is out of session. They can kind of hold on to that thing, because technically there's nowhere to return it to under a veto process because they're out of session. So neat little congressional tricks that the president can use. Now, here's Section 8 is kind of reflective of the whole concept of the Constitution. And a lot of people assume that the government has all the power and they decide what power they don't have. And it's really the opposite. The people have all the power, and the Constitution is more about enumerating specific powers that we voluntarily have ceded, right? So in this case, there's, I don't know, about 20 items in Section 8 that talk about powers of Congress. For example, I'll pick out a couple. Only Congress can define the process for becoming a citizen of the United States. Individual states can't do that. They can levy taxes. They can determine tax code. They can hire federal judges. They can work with legislatures to buy property across the country to use for federal facilities and build post offices and name them and things like that. Weights and measures. They decide that we use miles per hour instead of kilometers. They negotiated to buy a parcel of land from Maryland, I believe, for the District of Columbia as a place to run the federal government. They are responsible for protecting intellectual property, copyrights and trademarks and things like that. So, Congress is really the only entity. That's where the power is to start a war. So I know presidents do it. They can get away with it for a short period of time, but Congress really has to authorize.
Is that
things
what
like
the pirate
wars.
ship is about there?
No, it's not, because this is even better. You're going to love
this. Is this Admiralty?
I kid you not. Congress has the explicit authority under Section 8 to create pirates.
Oh, the Department of Piracy.
They can issue letters of marque and create privateers, for the purposes of intercepting other ships at sea and confiscating their stuff. Is that cool or what? I wish we would do that more often.
That one there is actually a lot of fun. So Department of Piracy, or whatever.
Dear France, we have decided to create a navy of pirates, and we're confiscating your wine and cheese. Thank you.
I speak in your general direction.
Exactly. Now, likewise, the following Section 9 talks explicitly about things that Congress cannot do, that are unconstitutional, so to speak. One of them, and this is a whole future show on its own because it's a really complicated issue, kind of hits on the slavery thing. But for now, we'll keep it real short. At the time, there were more anti-slavery states than slavery states, but unity was critical. If they didn't have unity, they were never going to be able to fight the British and start a country in the first place. So In a gesture of typical Washington compromise, they said, let's punt the slavery issue down the road a couple of decades. And they said Congress cannot stop slave importation until at least 1808. And that gave the slave states enough of a window to kind of deal with that, well, radical change, radical logistical change, if nothing else, at that point. So, again, we'll do a whole show on that because it's really a fascinating story. It
That
gets
is
into the
in
real
itself
meaning
fascinating.
behind
Yeah.
that whole 3/5 of a person thing that we still talk about to this day. And that was basically a trick to make sure slave states didn't get as much representation in the House of Representatives because it's population based. So there's always a lot more to the story than we like to assume. So another thing Congress can't do is suspend habeas corpus. We have rights. We have a right to not be falsely imprisoned, falsely detained, and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember the literal meaning is something like shall have the whole body or something like that. What it really means is the court, has the right to have the whole body of the accused in there, meaning the accused has the right for charges to be made publicly, for them to be able to defend themselves. The government can't just secretly throw you in jail, except in times of extreme emergency. Kind of a similar concept with another unusual word, no bills of attainder. And that basically says, hey, Congress can't create laws that say if you do something, you're immediately guilty and will go straight to jail without a trial. They can't say, hey, anyone who has ever run through Central Park covered in cream cheese is guilty and weird and should be jailed immediately. You have to have due process. You have to have a trial. You have to have all of that stuff. So really kind of a double protection over individual rights of the government overreaching and getting out of control. Congress can't make unequal situations between import duties or taxation for different states. Back at this time, states paid the tax bill. States would raise revenue however they chose to, and the state would owe Washington, the federal government, a tax bill. So Congress couldn't say, well, Rhode Island, you owe $90 billion and New York owes us $10 and a dozen bagels, right? Couldn't do that. It had to be reflective of the population of respective states. The last one is great. No royalty. Congress cannot bestow titles, make kings or dukes or princes or anything along those lines, not even the Kardashians. Right? No royalty whatsoever in this country. That was kind of a sore subject at the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Whoa. What is that first thing?
I'm afraid to ask the origin of this question.
Is this gay marriage or something here showing up?
Now that's stuck in my head, and I can't say. I saw this and I said, "Hey, that looks like a treaty situation."
Peace, dude.
Two people, peace, dude. Country flags and everything. So
Between
states
two
can't make
people of
their
the same
own
sex?
treaties. It's not gay marriage. No.
No, okay.
States can do
They
that.
have
I guess
flags
they
growing
have,
out
so
of their heads anyway, so
they do. It's a little weird, but
it's a little weird.
state level treaties would be strange. Louisiana can't say, "Hey, France, we want all of your Gruyere cheese and don't ship any to New Jersey." Right? So stuff like that's gotta be done at a centralized. Some things are just better done centralized. So states also can't print money and change duties, and basically can't create. Congress can't create an unlevel playing field between states. States can't start wars. And Joe, I know you're a Florida guy. The bad news: states cannot authorize pirates. Only the federal government can do that.
Arr.
So sorry to burst your bubble.
That really bothers me. Tom.
So that's it. So that's a quick walkthrough. Again, Article 1's the big one. That's where all the power is. That's where the priority is. There you have it. Short and sweet. Next time we'll get into Article 2, the executive branch, and go from there. In the meantime, if you want more content like this from the Constitution Show, hit the like button, subscribe to the ACRU on YouTube, and visit us at theacru.org for more. Thanks, everybody.